Alright, hey there guys, Eatercast here, aka JediBro95, coming at you guys with another video. In this video is something that I hinted at back in my Rings Don't Matter NBA discussion video, how I think that is a stupid-ass argument, and I think that argument needs to just stop being spewed in the NBA community, period. But in that video, I did mention in a side note that there was one player that I think was completely disrespected because of the circumstances that surrounded his career and also the help that he received throughout his career, and that is Tim Duncan. Now, Tim Duncan is honestly, in my opinion, one of the greatest players to ever play the NBA in the NBA. I don't think really people sit there and try to deny his greatness, although if you do, you're just fucking arrogant. But I hear a lot of people say that, these claims about Tim Duncan and his career, that really and truthfully speaking, that if you held these other players to the same standard, you would come to realize that a lot of other players had the same criticisms, the same things as Tim Duncan did throughout his career, but yet no one ever talks about it. So the first thing I want to talk about is the fact that everyone says that Tim Duncan had too much help. Now, this is a concept I've never understood in the NBA community. Why would you blame players for having help around them when that is what is required to win titles? Like, you can't just sit there and say that, oh, this person had too much help because, well, you need help to win championships. The only way you can really and truly win titles is if you have a significantly great supporting cast around you with either all-star caliber players to Hall of Fame caliber players around you. It's just fucking factually incorrect to win a title by yourself. And pardon me. And it just blows my mind when people sit there and say that Tim Duncan had all this help around him, but yet the thing is that this help, I don't really think he desperately needed the help that he had. I really think that he could have won championships, he could have won titles without Tony Parker or Manu Ginobili. He could have went to Orlando and played with Tracy McGrady and Grant Hill and won titles there. But he decided to stay in San Antonio for a couple of reasons, but that's not neither here nor there at this point. So the argument that Tim Duncan had too much help throughout his career is just asinine. But if you want to say that Tim Duncan had too much help, then why don't you say the same thing about Kobe Bryant? Like, don't get me wrong, may the man rest in peace, and I respect Kobe Bryant and his legacy, but one could make a very legit argument that Kobe Bryant had more help throughout his career than Tim Duncan ever did. Because Kobe Bryant had Shaquille O'Neal, Karl Malone, who was still a good player. I know Karl Malone was old, but Karl Malone was still pretty damn good. He was averaging about 20 and 7, 20 and 8 a game before he went to LA. Now, he also did have Gary Payton, who was averaging about 14, 15 points a game and like 6 assists or something like that. I can't remember what Gary Payton was putting up, but he had the 2004. He had Shaq. He had Pau Gasol. Pau Gasol was a really great player in his heyday. A lot of people just completely forget about that. And he also played with Shaquille O'Neal. He also played with an end of his rope, Karl Malone, that was still pretty damn good. He also played with Gary Payton, who was on the end of his rope again, but it was still pretty darn good until he got there. And then he also had Phil Jackson, who in my opinion is the greatest coach ever. But yet nobody ever complains that Kobe Bryant had too much help. Or the same thing can be said about somebody like Magic Johnson. Magic Johnson, in my opinion, I would argue, had the most help in NBA history for a player that has been named universally a top 5 player to ever play. But yet, nobody ever complains Magic had too much help, despite the fact that Magic had Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, James Worthy, Byron Scott, Michael Cooper, Norm Nixon. Now, granted, they may not be on the same, like some of these guys may not be on the same level as James Worthy, and that may be true, but none of those players that Tim Duncan ever played with was ever close to the level of a Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, especially with Kareem at his peak when he was giving about 25 and 11 while playing all NBA caliber defense. So again, what is the argument? If you're going to sit there and say Duncan had too much help, then why doesn't anybody say Kobe had too much help or that Magic had too much help? Nobody ever says that because it's just arrogant. In my opinion, it's just completely utterly stupid that people would even dare to make those claims. Oi. Now, the second thing I hear a lot of people sit there and say that Tim Duncan, and I'm not kidding when I say this, Tim Duncan in his peak was putting up Carlos Boozer stats. Yes, I've heard people legitimately sit there and say that Tim Duncan was putting up Carlos Boozer numbers at his peak. Now, definitely Carlos Boozer was a good player in his heyday. You know, Carlos Boozer was definitely a quality 20 and 10 player who actually did get some All-Star appearances in that time frame, which is amazing to me, especially when you consider Dirk, Kevin Garnett, and Tim Duncan were all in that time frame. But anyways, so the numbers that Karl Malone, my bad. The numbers that Carlos Boozer putting up and Tim Duncan put up, yeah, obviously the production is there and they're obviously similar. But what people fail to take into account is the fact that Tim Duncan was playing on one of the slowest paced teams in the NBA throughout that time frame. And also Tim Duncan was playing in one of the slower paced eras in NBA history in the early to mid 2000s. So, of course, with the pace being slower, obviously the points are going to be lower and shit like that. So it just doesn't make sense why people sit there and say that, well, Tim Duncan will put up those type of numbers. Well, yeah, because he played on like a slower fucking pace team, and he played on a team that really and truly was a system. It wasn't revolving around Tim Duncan and his play offensively. Because again, you had guys like Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili, who were quality players that were giving you 15 to 20 points a game on a night-to-night basis. You also had players like, say, Bruce Bowen, who was a good spot-up shooter that could provide you 10 points a game. Like, these players that Tim Duncan played with, he had a lot of players on his roster that were quality scorers and quality players that could produce points on a night-to-night basis. So Tim Duncan didn't have to worry about being the 25 and 12 guy that, a lot of people, including myself, really think he could be in today's NBA if he was playing in today's NBA. He could be a 25-12 or even a 25 and 15 dude if he really wanted to. Plus, also when it comes to statistics, Tim Duncan's impact was more so felt on the defensive end. Like, Tim Duncan is one of the greatest defensive players, and I would argue is potentially the greatest defensive player to ever play in the NBA outside of, say, somebody like a Michael Jordan and a Kobe Bryant. I would argue that Tim Duncan is the greatest defensive player to play in NBA history because of a few things. One, Tim Duncan actually made multiple all-defensive teams throughout his career, and he actually has the record for most all-defensive teams in NBA history, which is astonishing when you really think about the fact that he came in as a fucking 20-year-old rookie or something like that, and he was immediately one of the best defensive players in NBA history, and he is actually one of 5 NBA players to make an all-defensive team in their rookie season. Others being Manute Bol, and I can't remember everybody at this time. But Tim Duncan came in and immediately was one of the 5 best defensive players in the league. Not even Michael Jordan can say that, which is amazing to me because, everybody views Michael Jordan as one of the greatest defensive players ever, but yet he was unable to accomplish that. And honestly, when it comes to something simple as blocks, Tim Duncan is one of the greatest shot-blocking players to ever play in NBA history. So that's just, again, like, people just really just truly underestimate how impactful Duncan was, especially when it comes to the defensive side of the ball, because that is where Tim Duncan made most of his impact and most of his greatness comes from, is that side of the floor. And like I said, I truly do believe that you could probably make a legitimate argument that Tim Duncan is the greatest defensive player to ever play in the NBA. Now, the last thing I want to talk about that really isn't like a knock against Tim Duncan, but it's a common misconception that I hear about Tim Duncan and shit like that, and as everyone says that he was a power forward. No, he was not. He was a center, and shout out to Basketball Examined or Thinking Basketball, one of the two. I can't remember what it is. I'll put the video in the link in the description below. But he put out a video basically saying, exposing a myth that Tim Duncan was a power forward. He was not. Tim Duncan was a center, but the only reason they played Tim Duncan at power forward is because they had both Tim Duncan and David Robinson on the roster, and because both of them were such great players, they wanted to play both at the exact same time, so that way they could get the most out of the two of them and be able to play and be able to have their impact felt. So that's why I think Tim Duncan, people misconstrue him as a power forward. Tim Duncan was a center in his career. Tim Duncan was one of the greatest centers to ever play in the NBA, obviously behind Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, but people just think he was a power forward, which is just completely and not true. So please remember that when you're ranking Tim Duncan against all-time great power forwards, because he's not a power forward, he's a center. And even then, like, my question is, if Tim Duncan was a power forward, who was the San Antonio Spurs center after 2003? Because after 2003, David Robinson retired, right? So who was the starting center in 2004? It wasn't Robert Horry, because Robert Horry was a stretch four. It wasn't fucking Yamahimi, because Yamahimi was a bench player. So Tim Duncan was not a power forward. He was a center. And sure, he may have played power forward next to guys like Tiago Splitter, but we all know Tim Duncan was the center in that situation. Tim Duncan was the shot blocker. Tim Duncan was the defensive anchor. Tim Duncan was the best rebounding player on that team, and it's kind of great to know how great of a player he was later on in his career, even with him slowing down in terms of points and shit like that. So honestly, I can't say this enough. Tim Duncan is one of the most overlooked and most disrespected players in NBA history, and I honestly do believe that he needs to be given more respect where it's due, especially when you're not holding the same players to the same standard as you're doing Tim Duncan. If you're going to sit there and say that Tim Duncan had too much help in his career, then I need to hear that same criticism for guys like Magic and Kobe. If you're going to sit there and say that Tim Duncan's offense wasn't as impactful and was not that great, and he was putting up Carlos Boozer type numbers, then I need to hear the same thing for fucking guys like Draymond Green, who honestly it was putting up worse fucking numbers at the power forward position, but his impact is more so felt. My bad, I can't talk. On the defensive side of the ball, if that's what you're gonna say. So with that being said, guys, I just want to leave you guys on that note, and with that, I'm out. Peace.